Good evening, this is Larry, KV7LC, opening up the Davis County Amateur Radio TechNet for the night. It is Tuesday at 7:30, and I hope that there's lots of people on tonight. Just a couple of real quick announcements before we get into our topic. Don't forget that the club is going to be having elections for officers coming in December, so if you're interested in becoming an officer, reach out to one of the current officers and let them know about your interest, and then we can go from there. Also, that we will be getting together again for the TechNet in 2 weeks, so that will be in November, and just watch the website for more information. This is Larry, KV7LC. We also have up and running, we've got Joe Gerardo, and we've also got Gary here to help us out with our topic, which is HF antennas for tonight. So remember, this is a roundtable discussion. If you have a question or a comment, go ahead and come back to us with your first name and call sign, and we'll be happy to do what we can to answer your questions. And we're also looking for your input and what you prefer by way of HF antennas and what's worked for you well. Don't forget, we are using the 04 repeater tonight, so as you comment or have other items and questions, remember to break for a few seconds so that the repeater has a chance to reset. Otherwise, it could cut you off and we won't hear what you say at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Joe, and he can get us started off with a little bit about HF antennas. Joe, are you ready?
Sure, as ready as I'll ever be. Excuse me. Good evening, everybody. This is N7JEH, Joe. First, a disclaimer. I am by no means an expert on antennas. It's just things that I've learned over the last 30 years, and I have a lot more to learn. There's a lot of folks in the club that are much more knowledgeable about antenna design, modeling, performance than me, but I'll pass along a little taste to get us going, and then hopefully we'll get some of these other experts on to give their opinions. First, the old adage, and it's probably one of the truisms of amateur radio, is put your money into your antenna system. This is especially true of an HF station. Before you go out and buy the top-of-the-line radio, if you've got a radio you can get by with, put your money into your antenna. That's going to get you more bang for your buck than anything. And I'll even take it a little bit further than that. The first money you should spend should be on an antenna book, a good general antenna book. I like the ARRL book. There's lots of them out there, but start reading up on antennas, learning what they do, what they won't do. There's a lot to choose from, and it all depends on what you plan on doing with your station. For a lot of folks in our club, you know, their only exposure to amateur radio has been an HT or a modest mobile or base station antenna on VHF, UHF, and it's pretty simple to make that work as long as you haven't got a dead short or an open circuit. It's going to operate, especially if you're using a commercial antenna. Not a lot of adjustments to make. Pretty simple. With an HF antenna, there's so many variables that will change the performance of your antenna that you've got to take into account. You know, first of all, you've got to figure out what you want to do. You know, a lot of folks that are into emergency communications are in love with short tactical use of HF, and that's going to be an entirely different type of antenna than if you're interested in DX or, you know, talking to folks from other countries or other entities far away. So that's good to know. Some real basic. I've taken some things out of the antenna book and started with the antenna design chapter, which is near the back of the book, and the limitations that you've got. You know, everybody's going to have limitations. With HF, your antennas are quite a bit larger for the most part than your VHF antennas and UHF antennas. So size, you know, how big of a lot, how much property have you got that you can string up a large wire antenna or a large tower with the directional antenna. Cost. You know, HF antennas can range anywhere from some wire out of the scrap box to many, many, many thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, believe it or not, for an antenna system. And if you want to take a look at that, go to Whiskey 7 Romeo Nancy W7RN. That's the .com. That's the Comstock Radio Memorial Station up in Virginia City, Nevada. And Tom Taramina has got an antenna farm that you would not believe. He's got a huge contest station up there, and he's got many hundreds of thousands of dollars in antennas. Are you in a community that doesn't allow antennas, either by regulation, city code, county code, or deed restrictions such as CC&Rs? That's a big deal. A lot of hams that I know have retired into places, and the only place they can have an antenna is hidden in their attic or disguised as a flagpole, so that's a problem. And here's the biggest one, I think, is wife restrictions for neighbors, but primarily wife restrictions. A lot of wives don't think an antenna on top of or next to a house adds to the ambiance of her castle. So, you know what they say, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, and if mama ain't happy very long, you're going to be unhappy with half your stuff on the curb. Okay, generally, the lower the frequency you operate, the larger the antenna. And if you're operating 160 meters, for the most part, it's a pretty big antenna. And for most city lots, it's difficult to fit them on, but it has been done. With some engineering and ingenuity, it has been done. But think about that. You know, which bands do you want to work? Right now, the upper bands are pretty dead. I mean, there's activity on them. You know, 10 and 15 and 12. And there's not much activity on them, but they are open. I mean, I've made contacts down in South America on 10 meters in the last month or so, and it's there, but it's not like it has been with the solar cycle. But we're at the bottom, and we're getting better now. So those upper bands are going to start blooming here pretty quick. Generally, you've got three different major types of antennas. You've got wire antennas, such as dipoles, inverted Vs. Something that's become really popular lately, but they've been around forever, is the end-fed antennas. There's quite a few of those you see being sold. Off-center fed antennas, loops, rhombics. Loops and rhombics are really nice, but they're usually really large, but they do really well. Then the next major type of antenna is a vertical. Vertical antennas are nice if you don't have a lot of real estate. I've got a Hustler 5B TV that I use for primarily for 40 and 80 meter CW and for digital work, and it's just about 22 feet tall, self-supporting. I've got radials out in my yard in the back, but it doesn't take up a lot of real estate. It does pretty well, and has a nice low departure angle, so it's pretty good for DX work. And then the antennas that are classics are the directional antennas, and this is where you need to have a tower or a large supporting structure. And you've either got a Yagi, which is a beam, as most people call them, a parallel dipole with reflectors and directors on them. And the other major directional antenna is the quad, which is basically loops that are mounted along a boom and are directional. And then there's also phased arrays and stuff that people put up, but those things take a lot of real estate. So if you're going to start out with your first antenna, probably the easiest thing to build would be a wire antenna for a single band, like an inverted V or a dipole. And those can be made out of the scrap box, can be fed with TV twin lead in some cases. Folded dipole made out of 300 ohm TV twin lead. They used to sell these on the market for entry-level antennas, and they do really well. And interestingly enough, if you make a folded dipole out of twin lead or any other wire, for 40 meters, it's a 300 ohm antenna, and it will function extremely well both on 40 and with a very low SWR on 20, which is the third harmonic of 40 meters. So, the FCC or their predecessor, in their infinite wisdom, put the majority of our ham bands harmonically related. So if you built a less than stellar design of a transmitter and it threw harmonics, you thought you were on 40 meters and you were actually also transmitting on 20 and 15 and 10. At least you weren't interfering with another service, you were interfering with amateurs. A friend of mine, when he built his first CW transmitter, got his first QSL card from an FCC monitoring station in Hawaii. He was here in Salt Lake area, and he was transmitting on CW on 40, but he was also on 20, so he got a nice QSL card from the FCC. Last little piece before we turn it over, and then I'll be quiet for a while. Here's some things you're definitely going to need if you're going to plan to put up an HF antenna. First and foremost, you need a watt meter that's capable of reading forward and reflected power. This is how you're going to tell whether your antenna's working or not. An antenna analyzer is also very nice to have and will help speed up your antenna setup. They're spendy, but you can find used ones fairly cheap. I think there are some newer ones now that are software defined and they're even better. But the beauty of the antenna analyzers is not only do they give you the standing wave ratio, which is the ratio of power that's going out versus what's bouncing back and wasted and hitting your transmitter. It also will give you some interesting information that's very valuable. It will give you the resistance, the capacitive and inductive reactance. And after you've read your antenna book a few times, you'll understand what those mean and how you can go about working with those and correcting them. The next thing you're going to need is a dummy load. This is a universal antenna. It's rated for whatever power it's rated for. Mine, I've got one that's rated up to about 3,000 watts. It looks like a paint can full of transformer oil with a huge resistor inside of it. But the beauty of it is it will resonate at a very low standing wave ratio. It doesn't bounce any power back. It's a 50 ohm impedance. And for the most part, it doesn't radiate. So you can test your equipment, test your feed lines, etc. without radiating. You need some good quality feed line. For the most part, most people use coax, but you can use twin lead or parallel ladder line depending on your antenna design. You need a grounding system. These antennas are usually high up in the air and are prone to lightning strikes or even static discharges from a blowing windstorm or snowstorm. So you don't want that static energy getting into your radio. You want to pull that to ground. If you take a direct lightning shot, it's all over with. But for the most part, you need a grounding system. And then I said before, the most valuable thing you need is knowledge. Antenna books, an ARRL handbook, an Elmer, somebody to help you out, and have fun with it. You know, this is one thing we can still build without a lot of technical expertise is antennas. So with that, I'll shut my pie hole and turn it back over to Larry and Gary and see if anybody else wants to pipe up with some information. This is N7JEH, Layton, Utah.
Thank you, Joe. This is Larry, KV7LC. Gary is on the line with us over at N7D&D. Do you have anything you'd like to comment on?
Well, I'm on an HT tonight. I hope you can all hear me. I have been down a little bit, but you know, my first radio was a Kenwood that Brent sent home with me and got me all excited about. But I didn't know much about antennas, and so I built one. I figured out the frequency and took the 468 and divided it by, and ended up with an inverted V that was about 40 feet long on either end, and put it up in the air and do the math, and it'll tell you exactly what to do, you know. And I've been down the road with because of being in the wind zone as we are, I twisted off a couple of rotors, so I gave up the beam area. I had a couple of stepper IRs, and those are gone now. But I ended up with dipoles, and I used a dipole on 40 and 80 and 17 and 20 quite often, and they work very well. I have one north and south, and one that's east and west, and I have a switch that I can move them back and forth, and the wind doesn't bother them, and they're about 60 feet in the air, and you can't see them. I don't have an HOA wife, so that makes it really cool, but they are those kind of things. I'll pass it over to you, Larry. This is N7DND.
Thanks so much, Gary. And thank you again, Joe, for your comments. I think it's something that's really important for all of us. I've had my ticket for quite a number of years, but just recently, in the last 3 or 4, have gotten interested into HF, and Joe's absolutely right. You know, you put your money up in the air with a quality antenna, and then being realistic about your expectations. My spouse does not find antennas to be a selling point for her house, so I'm using an infed, and with that, I don't get a whole lot of contacts on voice. Just with where the house is, how my antenna has to be set up so that we keep the peace in the neighborhood and in the house. But on the other hand, digital works great for me. I get to jump on and make contacts all over the world on digital, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to make those contacts. When I'm looking at just making a contact, I go to FT8. If I'm looking to actually have a conversation with people, I use a different digital mode that allows me to communicate and type back and forth. And it's a lot of fun, but it's all about your expectations. And so with that, let's see who's out there listening to us jabberjaw a bit and take your comments or questions. So if you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation, come now with your first name and call sign.
And Mike, KD7M.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, great discussion so far. Hey, just a couple of points. Type of material to be able to put up for a wire antenna. Well, solid copper works. Copper-clad steel is actually far stronger and has much less stretch over the years. It will maintain its whatever length you put it up at. It will maintain that length quite faithfully. And because of the skin effect of RF, travels mostly over the skin of the wire. A copper-clad wire works just as well, or sometimes even better than a solid copper. The other thing is, yes, it's important to put your money where an antenna is, but any antenna works better than no antenna. KD7MG.
Great point. Any antenna is better than no antenna. I would agree with that completely. While we've got you on the air with us, Mike, can you remind me and maybe the rest what is being used there at the Layton EC?
Well, we had a nice infed wire that went back and it sloped down. They call it a sloper, but wonderful Layton City planted a pine tree underneath it that I didn't see, and over the years it grew up into the wire and broke the balun, just stretched it to the point where the balun couldn't handle it anymore. So we're in the process of putting up something else. I've got a proposal for an infed multi-band half wave. It's a half wave on 80, but it operates on many different bands, and trying to push that through to get that erected. We'll see how that goes. KD7MC.
Thank you, Mike. I couldn't remember. It's been years since I've been to the EC, and so I knew you had something. I just couldn't remember what it was. So with that, is there anyone else out there that would like to come now with a question or a comment? Just come now with your first name and call sign.
Hall, KC7RAF.
Ed Hall.
Good evening, everyone. One thing I haven't heard is anything about mobile HF tonight. Yes, you can go mobile with HF with generally vertical antennas, and they can either be fixed band, like using a ham stick, or ones that are either tap adjustable, such as the Perth type antennas that are Australian made, or some other versions of that of different manufacturers, and also motor tunable antennas, in which a rider goes on a coil, and you can tune the antenna by changing the coil tap continuously, but it again is a vertical antenna, and depends mainly for the counterpoise for that being the frame of the vehicle. But that's something else to consider, is going mobile with your HF as KC7RF. Back to the group.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions?
7ZN.
I didn't catch your first name, but go ahead.
This is Ron, KF7ZN. I just wanted to piggyback on Hall's comments that there is a lot of HF activity mobile. In fact, there's a special award called the County Hunters Award for working counties. I favor the diamond mobile antennas, but I run a radio 100 watts, but there's also on top of that, there's also portable, like when you're camping and stuff like that. And then there's also the SOTA, Summits on the Air, with their antennas and radios working off mountains. So there's a whole panorama of opportunities in that as well.
Ron, hey, I know you're big into HF. Why don't you take a couple of minutes and give a newbie like myself some of your helpful hints on how to get started?
Well, I think what's been said, I really can't improve on anything. I mean, there's some very knowledgeable people from what I've been hearing. I think what I would say is that it doesn't cost a lot of money to get started, and you can do a lot. I mean, I started with just running some wires from my house down to our fence, and then I got a little more specialized and went to having a half-wave dipole on 20 meters and 30, 20, and 17, and started working that, and then saved up my money, and then had a Yagi, a beam for a 3-element. Now I've got a nice stepper outfit up on my tower, but I just gradually improved on it and added to it. But I think something that's really important is don't feel like you have to have a lot of money invested at the beginning if you don't have it, to be able to get on the air and have a lot of fun. And then also, I would just say that, at least for me, HF is my main attraction, and there is a lot of mentors and help available both here in the Valley and online, and there is so many opportunities and so much going on with HF, so much, such a fraternity that don't ever hesitate to just jump in and have a lot of fun with it. That would be my addition to the discussion. KF7ZN.
Thank you, Ron, for letting me put you on the spot like that. This has been a great discussion. Thank you. I'm learning a lot. So anyone else out there with a comment or question, come now with your first name and call sign.
This is Rob, K7RSL.
Head.
I wanted to ask a question, piggybacking on the mobile operations. I've got an antenna on order from MFJ, and question about the counterpoise that I need to run off the radio, and just looking for some advice on what gauge or what type of wire And then, how do I compute the length of that K7 RSL?
And D&D.
Gary?
I think Hall would be the expert, but when I was running mobile, I was running an ATAS 100, and I ran it for 5 years, and I found that my number one counterpoise was my exhaust system. I'd take my wire, I was using a number 12, it was stranded off my antenna, and I went right straight down and tied to my exhaust system. And my exhaust system, believe it or not, went from one end of my vehicle to the other, and it gave me a great counterpoise. But that's what I used. Maybe pass over to Hall. I know he runs mobile all the time. Over to you, Hall. N7 D&D.
7 D&D with the group, KC7RF. Thanks for throwing me under the bus, Gary. I have not gone to that extent. The vehicle that I primarily run HF from is either my Suburban or the Honda Pilot, and the body of both is all metal, so not like some of the more current vehicles that has a lot of plastic, but the frame of a vehicle and the motor and the exhaust system are all metal, conductive, and those all form good ground plane. Keep the lead, again, stranded is what I tend to use, and if you use number 12 or even go to number 10 stranded, and it can be insulated, it doesn't matter, covered or bare. Covered is generally easier with just the insulation on it. It doesn't bother it. And as direct as you can to the closest piece of good-sized metal that you can attach to, and make sure that it's a good ground, not just through the trying to get through the paint, but get down to bare metal with it. And the vehicle itself is your ground plane, and I'm not sure what else to add to that, but there are a number of different approaches on antennas for those out there, has been pointed out. It's KC7RF. Back to the group.
Did that answer your question? I'm sorry, I lost the call. I'm sitting here in my car in Clinton and didn't write it down.
Roger, this is Rob, K7RSL. I appreciate the advice. Thank you. Back to the group.
Thank you, Rob. Sorry about that. My memory's a little shot today. So any other questions or comments? Come now with your first name and call.
This is Jim, KJ7GJC, and I have a question about mounting an antenna.
Right ahead, Jim.
I had the demo quite a while back. Rick, W7BQ, did one on an end-fed half-wave, and I got the instructions from him, and I built one of those before I even bought the radio. Now I have a radio, but I've got a yard the backyard is mostly a gigantic elm tree, and it leans almost over the house and takes up probably half the backyard. And I was wondering if I mount this thing like off one peak on the roof, and then run it down to the other end of the house and maybe over to the corner fence, and then back under the tree to the other corner fence. If that's going to be a problem, it's going to be kind of a funny U shape. But do you think that will work? And the other question is, what do I mount it to? Would like 1.25" EMT be sufficient, or is that going to be too wimpy for the windstorms we have?
The group would like to answer Jim's question.
You picked that up.
Would love to if I was any good at antennas, but I'm going to have to turn it over to somebody who's better than me.
97JH, I can take a stab at it.
Or Joe, I was just thinking about you.
put it up and see how it works. If you're worried about wind, the wind resistance of a wire antenna is very low. It's not like a beam or something that's large and it's got a cross-section that the wind can actually impinge upon. So I wouldn't really worry too much about the wind. I don't imagine these end-fed wires like to be run up against metal. So I would try to somehow route that. If you've got to go vertically and then go horizontally out to the tree, if you could use some sort of non-conductive rope or something with a loop that gets you, a few feet away from metal, that's probably going to help. But again, that's, if you've got a friend who's got an antenna analyzer, throw it up real quick with some ropes and strings just to get it up in the tree, and then put the analyzer on and see if and where it's resonant, and go from there. Definitely want to get this done before snow flies, though. This is N7JH.
Thank you, Joe, for picking that up for me. I can tell you for my house, where it is quite hidden. I do go up the pine tree that's over in the side of my yard. I go straight up that. Got my 18-year-old to climb up there for me. We connected it in with a good piece of rope that's not going to degrade too fast. And then from there, I was able to pick up some insulators that I used picked up over at a Home Depot. And the insulators just to keep it away from, because we connected it then to the fence around the property. And so the insulators that I'm using keep it all good 6-7 inches away from the wire fence, the chain link fence, and that works really well for me. But definitely, I put an antenna analyzer on it, took a look, see where it was, and made some modifications from there so I could get it to do what I wanted it to do. So there's some advice, there's some suggestions. Any other comments or thoughts, Jim?
C7RF for a couple of thoughts.
Need to get it up there in the air, and I do have an antenna analyzer, and then try it out, see what it does, and make some adjustments from there. Do you think inch or inch and a quarter EMT would be a strong enough support for it on the ends, or I guess in the middle too? I'll tie it to the EMT with an insulator in the middle, probably in a section of rope or whatever, and an insulator, get it away from the metal. But do you think that'd be strong enough, or should I go something bigger?
I think off the top of my head, I think that should work relatively well. But there was also a double that came in with some thoughts and comments. Who was that came just a couple of minutes ago?
DC7RF, and sorry I doubled. We apparently jumped on about the same time. But certainly inch for wire antennas should definitely be sufficient. A couple of thoughts. One is, okay, you've got it tied off with a Dacron rope or something similar to that, paracord, and your insulator. And if there's a way that you can kind of have the your rope so that you can tie a weight, something 2 to 5 pounds, depending on the length of the wire, that it can kind of float. So when you get a snow load, you're not trying to stretch the wire, but you're actually just lifting the weight and letting the weight maintain tension on it as a thought. Another thing to think about as well, if you're dealing with end-feds or, for example, dipoles, with a dipole, generally you're shooting for, say, 50 ohm at the feed point, and you're feeding it with 100 watts. You can figure what the current is at that point in the 50 ohms to have 100 watts. But now, at the quarter wave antenna, the ends of the antenna are infinite, almost, at least several thousand ohms impedance, and so you now have a high impedance, lower current, but with the high impedance you also have a very high voltage at the endpoints. So you always want to be careful and keep those endpoints up away from where folks could reach up and accidentally touch it when you're on the air or so forth. Some of you may have seen demonstrations with neon bulbs and that sort of thing to light when you get out toward the ends of like dipoles. So just a couple of thoughts on that, but certainly inch should be well more than sufficient just to support the wire. But you know, it's got to be stiff enough that it doesn't bend too severely just because of the weight of the wire. So that's my thoughts. KC7RF, back to the group.
Comment, KG7VUC.
Comments that you'd like to share?
7JEH, I've got one more.
Well, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it just dawned on me when Hall started talking about snow. I haven't seen it around here. I would imagine you get it, but over in Elko area, when I lived over there, we would get, when we'd get sub-zero, 10, 20 below zero, we would get freezing fog. They would call it pogo nip or hoarfrost, and there was several times that I looked out early in the morning and I could see that my normal inverted V wire antenna, the wire was 2 to 3 inches in diameter and weighed a lot more than it did before. So that's probably something to consider from the loading standpoint, is ice load, freezing rain, that sort of thing, where you get ice building up on the wire. That's probably your biggest risk as far as strength goes. Back to you guys. This is N7JEH.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. So this is Larry, KV7LC. Anyone else out there in the group that'd like to come back with your name and call sign and participate in this conversation?
G7VUC, Jerry.
Hey, Jerry?
Regarding the weight that I believe Joe was talking about, I've got a 103-foot dipole. One of the ends is on my house, and the other is in a high up as I could get it in a large tree in my backyard. That tree tends to flex quite a bit when we get the winds that we get. I put a pulley and a brick and a rope tied onto the end of my antenna. The brick is enough to keep the antenna in the position I want, and that gives me probably a good 5 or 6 feet of flex, which I've never needed that much. KG7VUC.
That's a great idea. Thank you for adding that to the conversation. Appreciate it. Anyone else that would like to come with their name and call?
7RF with a comment on that last one.
Hello?
Comment, if you're going to use a pulley, make sure that the rope size is proper for the pulley, because if it comes off and jams, you don't have a pulley anymore. And that often happens. And what I've found, and AC7H Brent has made this suggestion a long time ago, something like a carabiner with the rope through the carabiner slides easily, doesn't jam, and has enough strength to support things without any sort of jamming. So just a thought on that one. If you're not sure about rope size and your pulley, why that's another way to go. KC7RF, that's my comment.
That's a great comment. Thank you. Using a carabiner, great idea. Also something that you can carry around with you if you're doing something out during camping or that kind of thing. It's amazing what we have in our camping kits that can help us to get on the air. Any other comments or questions that you'd like to come back with?
DC-7H, Brent.
Brent, go right ahead.
Okay, well, I've been kind of reading the mail here, as you might say, and I have several comments. Number one of the reasons you want to put your money with the antenna is that the antenna works both on transmit and receive, whereas if you use a power amplifier, your transmit is much greater than your receive capabilities, and some people will use the terminology, you're an alligator, more mouth than ears. So that's another reason to put your money in the antenna. Once you get good quality communications, then if you're trying to do special DX or something like that, amplifier is still appropriate.
Are you still out there?
I'm still here, Brent. Anybody else? Am I still got the head?
Good to go. Keep it coming.
Okay, I guess I pushed on the wrong button when I went back. I broke, so I wouldn't take up, have a timeout timer go off on me. Anyway, I was saying the calculation for a dipole or an inverter V is basically the same. They say the impedance on the dipole is closer to 75 ohms, where the inverted V is a little better and towards 50 ohms. But either one will work. I wouldn't worry about which coax you really use. It isn't affected that much. The antennas that are long wires or end-fed, if you have to string it around to make the corners and stuff, like Joe said, just keep it away from metal and even the trees. If you've got your antenna into the trees, you're going to have losses. And those lengths, as long as you get the length relatively close, the antenna will work, even if you're going around corners and up and down and everything else. And like Hull said, keep the safety issue in mind. Keep the ends above reach of little kids and animals. I use inverted V on my tower. I have two of them. On top of my tower, I use two dipoles, one in each direction. So I have 4 leads coming off the tower, and I'm using the hard-drawn copper, or copper-clad steel, whichever way you want to call it. And both the antennas actually also double as guy wires. With the heavy-duty copper-clad wire, it works as a guy wire as well as an antenna. So that's a real plus. I've used that multiple places. It works like a champ. So that's comments that I have thus far. AC-7A. KF-7Z.
Go ahead. I didn't catch your name or call, but go ahead.
It's kind of quick with that. It's Ron again, KF-7ZN. I just wanted to echo and affirm what Brent was saying, and I think a couple of others, that as I've improved my station, I've always put my time, priority, and money into my antennas first, my rigs second, and my amps third, or maybe even fourth. Now I've got nice and everything, but that was when I was starting out, and I still think that that's kind of the direction that somebody should go if you want to get into HF, for where you can get the most bang for your buck in being out in the air. KF-7Z.
Thank you so much, Ron. Any other comments or questions out there? Come now with your first name and call sign, please.
Brent, AC-7A.
Brent?
Just had one more. Hope I haven't had a senior moment here and forgot what I was going to say. I guess I did. I'll have to think about it and come back.
No problem, Brent. Anyone else would like to come now with your first name and call?
Hey, Larry, just have Brent sing to us while he's trying to remember his thought.
Oh, that's funny. But anyone else?
W7V.
Rick?
I was just going to echo what everybody else said and just mention one more time that it doesn't have to be perfectly straight and in a line. One of the things that I use here in order to get on 80 meters, because I've got a somewhat of a limited space in my backyard, and I had a 40-meter dipole, and what I ended up doing was actually changing it over to an off-center fed, about 1/3, 2/3 as far as length is concerned, one side to the other, and I've just got a big loop that goes around. The ends don't come together, so it's not a total loop, but it works really well, loads up on 80 meters like a champ, and quite frankly, I think the off-center fed is more efficient as far as being able to get on the air on multiple frequencies than a traditional dipole is W7VQ.
For that comment, Rick. Appreciate it. Anyone else have a question or a comment?
C7H, Brent, I'm back now.
Hey, what you got, Brent?
I just remembered when I first got started, I asked this communications engineer that was really, some of the people on the net, they know him, Pat Buller. Anyway, he's deceased now, but anyway, he was quite knowledgeable, and I asked him how high in the air should I get my antenna, and he indicated do whatever you can to get at least 35 feet. From then on, you're got to spend lots more money to get higher than that, but the greatest advantage you have is at least to 35 feet. Then it's diminishing returns as you go up. Even though the higher you go, the better it usually is. So that's a good point. If you can get at least 35 feet, that's a good engineering point to try to get as high as you can, but get at least 35 feet if you can. AC7A.
Thank you, Brent. 35 feet. I'll remember that. Anyone else with a comment or a question?
7JEH.
Joe?
Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, when I first got my license, I bought a rig from a friend of mine. It was an FT101EX, the old hybrid Yaesu. I've still got it, looking at it over here. It's my backup to my backup to my backup. And I was a technician back in the days when the technician had to pass 5 words a minute code and the novice and general exams. So I had privileges on 10 meters phone. So the first antenna I put up, having had been a CBer for many years before that, was I had an old base station antenna called the Silver Rod, which was I think it was a 5/8 or a half-wave vertical, and I cut it down to 10 meters, and that's when the bands were good. This was back in the mid-1980s. And I worked all over the world with a chopped-down CB antenna on some TV antenna mast strapped to the side of the house. So don't let all of this stuff freak you out. And by the way, you technicians all have privileges for voice on 10 meters. So you can get on HF right now, and granted, it's not there all the time, but you'd be surprised, especially on contest weekends. There's going to be people there burning their path in the ionosphere. So, you know, even if you think you haven't got HF privileges, if you've got a license, you have HF privileges on phone on 10 meters. So, do some thinking. See if you can find something at a swap meet or you know, an old CB or buddy or something and chop down an antenna. Don't be afraid to experiment. This is N7JEH.
7CN, Ron.
Ron?
So, yeah, for example, this weekend, I wasn't able to get on long. I had a lot of family in town, but there was the CQ Worldwide Sideband Contest. So I jumped on for a couple hours, and 15 meters was hot. 10 meters was pretty good, but 15 meters, I was pretty much anywhere. I mean, I was hitting China, Australia. I worked all of South America. I think I probably picked up about 40 or 45 countries in a couple of hours on 15 meters and a little bit on 10. So there is, you know, quite a bit going on. So anyway, just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you, Ron. I forgot about that contest. I wish I would have remembered. Thank you. Anyone else with a comment or a question?
T7H, Brent.
And Brent?
Yeah, you can load up about anything. You always hear these things about loading up the screen door or your window screen or a rain gutter. We actually did for a senior that was tied to an apartment that didn't wow antennas or anything. We actually brought his coax out of a window area, and we tied the center lead to a rain gutter coming down, and then we drove a ground rod over the cement block below the rain gutter, tied the ground lead to the ground rod, and put the rain gutter cement block over that, so it was inconspicuous. And he ran 40 meters on the beehive net for many years. AC78.
Thank you, Brent. Anyone else? We're coming to the end of this net for the night, but let's go ahead and open it up for one more round. Anyone else with a comment or a question that would like to come?
KD7MG, Mike.
Mike?
Hey, I've got to step away, but before you close this, we should have some comments about properly grounding an HF antenna. We've got very low humidity at times and a lot of static buildup along with, of course, lightning strikes and things like that. KD7MG.
A reminder, Mike. Thank you. Is there anybody that would like to talk specifically about grounding with the group for us?
Ron.
Ron?
Just a couple of quick thoughts. First of all is, oh shoot, I just went brain dead. There's a guy that here in Salt Lake that is probably one of the premier people in the nation. He sells a lot of products, and I've got his name written down. I can't believe it. I know the guy really well. But anyway, he has a ton of good information of products. But grounding is incredibly important. Ward Silver, what is he in, 0XX or something like that, he does a lot of presentations, and at the ARRL has a great book out on grounding and bonding, but you just can't be too careful on how you ground and bond your equipment, your towers. I think for mine, I've got 4 8-foot rods driven into the ground and then CAD welded with a pretty substantial ground wire to the tower itself. And there's all kinds of other ways to ground, but others will give you particulars. I'm just saying it's very, very important for a lot of reasons.
You're on. Anyone else like to come back with comments on grounding?
W7DQ.
And Rick?
I just want to also endorse the grounding and bonding book that Ron just mentioned. I've got a copy of that, and I refer to that an awful lot. When I put the rooftop tower on my house, I actually used that book and some of the equipment that I could pick up from DX Engineering that actually allows you to, since the mast is rotatable and you want to be able to get the ground coming down around, I've actually got a ground rod that goes around the mast itself and then goes down to the tower, and then have run a substantial ground wire all the way down to multiple 8-foot copper rods that I've got into the ground as well. And I actually bonded that also to the to my house ground, so it's grounded to the same. When it comes to grounding, it's all about potential difference between any 2 points that you've got in your grounding system, and you want to get that tied together so that there is no potential difference any place in your grounding system. W7VQ.
So much for that. I was just thinking that grounding and bonding would be a great conversation that we could have and take up at least an hour for that in one of our future tech nets. Because it is absolutely vitally important, not only for our equipment, but also just for our human life. And so it's definitely something we should definitely talk about and think about. And if you need help or haven't done any grounding of your equipment, definitely reach out and let's see if we can find you an Elmer that can help you out with that. So with that, I'll open this up one last time for anybody else that'd like to come with a question or comment. We're looking at closing out this net in about 3 minutes. So I'll open it up just for another quick comment or so, and then close out the net from there. So if you have a comment, come back with your first name and call sign, please.
Lisa, K7LAC.
Lisa?
I just wanted to thank you for holding the net. It's the first one I've been able to catch, but it's made grading papers this last night of the term much more bearable.
Thank you, Lisa. That's good to hear. I hope we were entertaining. I definitely have gotten some laughs in there. So real quick, let's just for closing comments, we'll go over to Joe, who started us out, then over to Gary, and then I'll close out the net. Joe, do you have any final comments for tonight's net?
Ron and Mike both said the same thing. Any antenna is better than no antenna. Have fun, experiment, ask questions, read. This is N7JEH. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you again, Joe. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Gary, N7DND.
I concur with Joe. I know that when I got my first antenna up, and I've enjoyed it, and nothing makes you tickle. I remember running into the house and telling KJ that I just talked to a gentleman in Japan, and how much fun it was, and I was just tickled pink to think that I'd talked to somebody in another country. So get a taste of it, have fun with it. Remember, it's just a hobby. Have a good time. I'll pass it back to you, Larry, and you can close out the net and talk about our net in 2 weeks, N7DND.
Thank you, Gary. So this is Larry, KV7LC. I want to thank everyone for participating in tonight's net. You guys make this worth it, being able to talk and learn, and I definitely have learned a lot and can't wait to put some of it into practice. Just a couple of real quick reminders. Don't forget that the club will be holding elections for officers in December, so if you're interested in participating as an officer, reach out to one of our current officers and they'll talk to you about it, and if that's a good fit for you, we'll get you put on the ballot. Also, if you're interested in getting involved in the club, we also have a number of standing committees that we would love to have some more help with. And we'd also love some more help with these tech nets that we're having on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, at least for the next while, until we figure out what COVID's doing for us. We're looking for topics. We're looking for people that would like to talk about those topics. And Gary, Joe, myself, and a number of others are happy to help facilitate and man the net so that you can answer questions or do your presentation, and then we can go around from there. 2 weeks, we'll have another TechNet at 7:30 on this frequency. I believe, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to talk about hotspots or repeaters. I can't remember which. But check the website. Gary, do you remember which one we're going to do? Gary signed off. I'll just check the website. I'll have that posted for us by the weekend of what our next topic will be. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for this net, feel free to reach out to me either on the radio or online at webmaster@dcarc.net. Also remind you that Halloween is coming up. It's a great time to be on the radio and keep in contact as we're giving out candy if your community is able to do that. And with that, I just want to tell everybody to stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy your time on the radio. It's a great, fun hobby as long as you use it, so I encourage you to be on the air. With that, I'll go ahead and turn this frequency back over to normal operations and close this net. Have a great night, KV7LC.
I think somebody doubled with you through most of that. Maybe Gary was back.
Gary, were you back?
Was, but I didn't mean anything. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
That was great. Thanks, Hall. Appreciate it. Thank you, Gary. Have a great night, everyone. KV7LC, Claire.